Okay, you guys, so in exploring resentments today, I've been kind of surprised at what I have found in myself. For example, there's been some situations with a particular Christian coworker who has repeatedly indicated to me that she does not believe that I love everybody because that's just not possible. And has on a couple of occasions pretty much told me to my face, I don't believe you, that's not a thing, when talking about love, kindness, generosity, forgiveness, things like that, and a couple of other things. And I was pretty sure that I had gotten through the forgiveness of that and that we were okay going forward and we were working together just fine. But in reflecting back on something to balance a schedule, I experienced a flare of resentment over that quite steep. And I realized that that resentment is preventing me from forgiving her. So the lesson I've learned in that is that resentment prevents forgiveness. So in spending so much time focusing so heavily on resentment today, it has come to me that I still carry a very strong resentment towards the modern, apostate, secular Christian church. I typically avoid using the word Christian in any way that's directly related to me, my spirituality, my character, my belief system. There have been some times when I have made the mistake of using that word, and the power of that label has cost me friends who already know who I am and how I treat them and have been my friends for many years. And in fact, when that conversation came out and she said the word about not having any friends that are Christian, and I mentioned to her, well, honey, I'm a Christian, her face went dead white. She looked at me in a way in which she had never looked at me before, and she said, I would have never used that word to describe you. You're a Christian? I don't like Christians. And my reply to her was, perhaps the ones you've met haven't been doing it right. And she kind of went, what? And that was the end of that 9-year friendship. Because I used the word Christian. Didn't have anything to do with the fact that I had always treated her with love, that we got along great, we had a great friendship, we had great commonalities, we had great conversations. What mattered was the power of that label, Christian, and the connotation that it carries around the world to judgment, criticism, wrath, persecution, hatred, condemnation, and a ton of other things that I personally have experienced through that church, the very church that I was forced to be raised in. So I have discovered this deep-seated resentment towards the modern apostate church. And in exploring that, I know why. Because they took everything about me that had any possible potential for good, kind, loving, forgiving, accepting, and they did everything they could to destroy it and make sure that I spent every day of my life knowing that in their church and in their religion and for their God, I was unworthy piece of trash wretch who would never amount to anything, who was unworthy of forgiveness, who was full of nothing but fault, and who had no valuable place in this world. And these were people I grew up with. And to this day, I recently experienced this at a family gathering where a bunch of my mother's church friends and former pastors and missionaries were present. They still talk to me and treat me in exactly that same manner, while I treat them in response with love and acceptance and forgiveness, and they consider me weak. So, yeah. The same church that took the very blessed gift from God that was sent to me to save, salvage, and rescue my life, they refused to accept, considered a mistake, and made me apologize for before they would allow him to be accepted. I'm feeling the resentment as I say these things to you. And it's good that I'm getting it out because I have to get through it, get to the other side of it. Because someday, Father might require me to go into one of those places. And if I don't have myself in check, I will do more harm than good. So it's good to get this out. So like many of you who just still haven't put the thought into it and come to terms with it, I have a great deal of resentment toward the church. And the incredible amounts of psychological, emotional, and physical damage that was done to me by their church. And the way that they treat me. And I have resentment for the way that they're constantly trying to drag me back there so they can continue to treat me badly and diminish all that I've become. I don't forgive the church because the church was designed to do exactly that, as we've recently learned. But I will be learning and working on forgiving the people. And that's the interesting thing about resentment and the word resentment, even in the dictionary by definition. I have a couple of definitions that I haven't given to you yet. And both of those definitions eliminate the people factor. They say resentment is towards a thing or a treatment, but it doesn't mention that the thing or the treatment doesn't happen without the person. So I'm going to go into an appointment, and when next we see each other's faces on this video, we'll talk some more in a different place. So as I stated earlier, I have more to say about resentment, but I'm finding it to be a challenging topic. So I think I'm going to go back to somewhere comfortable to pick up the uncomfortable subject matter. Okay, so let's start with talking a little bit about what resentment is. So Webster says that resentment is a perpetual state of ill will towards a feeling of, or being treated unfairly. So being treated unfairly would be by another person, because the system can't treat you unfairly. A system can write an unfair law or an unfair process or an unfair policy, but it takes a person within that system to execute it, and thereby that is when it becomes unfair. So it would have to be a person. Another definition I came across, which actually was, when I broke it down, it was resentment is, but it was a bitter indignation toward a situation perceived as wrong, unjust, or injury. A situation, again, would not be resentful scenario unless there was a person involved that carried out the said situation that was perceived as being unfair treatment. So resentment comes from treatment or perception of a situation. Most of those situations or perceptions that build resentment are going to be driven by somebody else's form of communication. And in many situations, that's going to be the spoken word or the written word, depending upon which one you're pursuing. So if our perception of the words being directed at us are perceived as being unfair treatment or an unjust situation that we consider to be wrong, unjust, or injurious, then we might build up a resentment. But a resentment is it's a subtle thing. It's not necessarily overt like anger, when you just know you're mad. I'm so mad. You don't go around saying, I'm so resentful. You don't do that. You know, I'm angry about it. I'm irritated. I'm frustrated. We have a lot of different words we use that describe our levels of anger, because that's pretty much what those are, is levels of anger. But the word resentment isn't usually thrown around as that form of a descriptor. How many times do you actually admit that you're resentful of something? I don't. And in fact, I didn't think I had any resentments until I started exploring this today. When I came up, certain things, I've got resentments about things in my family. Well, don't we all? Get over it, Deanna. And all the stuff which was really saddened me the most was the situations in my family over which I'm holding resentment have to do with stuff. Oh my God, y'all. Stuff. Physical stuff from this messed up world. And I'm holding resentments? No. Absolutely. So that's resolved. Well, if it's not yet, it will be very soon. So that one, not okay. You don't have resentments over people that you love over stuff that wasn't yours to have resentment over to begin with, right? Not okay. So I've got some resentments there. Worked those out, figured out I'm resentful towards the church, right? Because now I know what resentment means. But it was also subtle. And as I'm going through work at my very last appointment, and I'm having a conversation with a peer, somebody that I've been associating with regularly for over a year and a half, who has completely changed and redefined her world. 180 degrees, completely different person. And in the course of this conversation, something was brought up that was a clarifier. She was coming clean with me about something that she had been dishonest with me about previously. And I instantly felt resentment toward her for deceiving me. And that was when I learned in that moment that resentment is very subtle. Because I had absolutely no right nor cause to hold any resentment for her. My job is to help her get to the point where she can do exactly what she was doing. For me to hold resentment over that is counterproductive to the entire job at hand. But that brought me to the awareness of the subtlety of resentment, because we don't necessarily know it's there until we lash out later. We just kind of suck it up with this little passive aggressive, well, okay, thing, and then later it comes at us and we're like, rawr, and I hate that person, I hate that, or any variety of other ways where we may not understand why we suddenly found ourselves emotionally unbalanced over something, and we have to kind of dig down and feel and find we have some resentment there that needs to be worked out. Something else that I've learned through this today that has been incredibly profound for me: resentment prevents forgiveness. Resentment is not hatred. Resentment is not anger. But resentment is a negative, unbalanced emotion towards another human being for something perceived, not even real. And how many different ways are there to perceive and interpret even one word, or one look, or body language, or what in your own mind you're going through and you project onto another person? I've been with people in a car or in walking down the street, and they're like, oh, well, she just thinks she's all that, doesn't she? Did you see the way she looked at me? What I had seen was somebody that was in deep thought while they were walking down the street. That's all I had seen. But the person next to me had perceived that as somebody who was too good for her own britches, so to speak. And it was startling to me to realize that I was so far off, in my view, from where they were in theirs. And it was also clarifying as to the state of affairs in the world in which we're living right now. It's becoming increasingly challenging to function in love and kindness when even the slightest look on somebody's face and somebody perceives them as being some evil, vile, unworthy person, and they don't even know their name. Perceptions can build resentments if we don't communicate. Assumptions will build resentment, because that situation I just described to you, a total stranger is now holding resentment against another total stranger over something that's not even real. And they're angry and hurt about it, and it's not even a real thing. The power of perception over the manner that we communicate and the words that we choose to use. And resentment, in many, many cases, is built around words. Somebody else's perception of the words cast in their direction. Because they don't necessarily understand the words, the person's motivation, the intent of the words. Our words are designed in this language to deceive. How many times, even like, for example, the word love. That word is abused so badly. Several years ago, back when I still used Facebook, I wrote a huge rant one day because I was in a mood, and I get that way. Well, I don't anymore, but I used to get that way. I wrote this huge rant about the misuse and the abuse of the word love, and how it's applied so randomly and inappropriately to things that have no method or manner of responding back in like emotional status. Love, for example. I love this car. Really? Does that car love you back? Did you love the money you spent on that car too? You don't love an inanimate object. But my point of that is the way words get twisted around and misinterpreted by others and misused. I've been guilty of misusing words. That's why I'm so diligent about looking them up now before I communicate with you about them, to make sure I completely understand the word in every possible way I could understand that word I'm about to address and its connotation and its impact. Because otherwise I am also perpetuating a misperception of a word, which could eventually lead to a resentment against a stranger for what you would perceive as being misled. And I don't want a part of that either. So the rain is wonderful and the muck is between my toes and the river is rushing hard, but I've got family in my house nowadays that are waiting for me to get there, which is unusual, unexpected, pleasant, but overwhelming. So I might have more to bring to you before I wrap this video up. I don't know yet. Have a great day. Hi. Okay, so I've had some time to put everything together and process it, get home, calm down, focus on my notes. And I think the most important things that have come to me about resentment that I'll be focusing on going forward is much of our resentment that we grow in our own lives is based on our own perceptions, not necessarily reality. So if you experience resentment, perhaps look at what's going on. Are you having an expectation of somebody? Are you perceiving something in a way that could very easily be as something else? Is it blatant? Are you, just ask, talk to them, use communication, which leads us into the next thing I learned, which is the careful use with intent with words. And that just came out all wrong. See how badly I messed that up? Now let's say it right. Using words carefully and with intent can go a long way in minimizing any resentments being built up against you. Can also go a long way in helping diffuse any resentments that you may have. And I think the most important thing that I will take forward as I work through some of these resentments that I've discovered today is that resentment defeats forgiveness and it grows darkness in the heart very subtly, and you may not even be aware of it until a specific trigger or person sets it off. And that's what makes it so dangerous, is it's very subtle and you don't recognize it's there until it's triggered, because it's not something that's always sitting with you. It's something that comes back to you. And that makes them more dangerous because they're hiding and we may not find them and eradicate them. So I'm pretty sure I've covered everything I need to share publicly about resentment for healing and growth and discovery and education. I'm going to go ahead and wrap this one up for the night. Thank you all for your time. I hope I've provided you some insight and information that is beneficial to your own path in progress. I will use this word properly. I love you and have a great night.